Welcome to Midnight Delight, where nightmares come to play. Tonight, we venture deep into the shadows where ancient legends and dark creatures await. Gather round and let me take you on a journey into the unknown, into the realm of the Skinwalker. I'm not sure why I agreed to take my family on that trip, but something about the quiet, isolated cabin in the woods sounded like a perfect getaway from the chaos of city life. It wasn't far from a small town in Arizona, nestled deep within the forest that seemed almost untouched by time. My wife, Sarah, and our two kids, Jake and Emma, were all excited for a week of hiking, fishing, and just unplugging from everything. I wish I had known what was waiting for us there. The first couple of days were perfect. We'd wake up early, eat breakfast on the porch while the sun rose over the trees, and then spend the day exploring the trails. The kids loved it. Emma found a fascination with collecting leaves and rocks, while Jake was all about trying to spot wildlife. Sarah and I were just happy to see them so engaged with nature. But everything changed on the third night. We had just finished dinner, and the kids were playing a board game on the floor while Sarah and I sat on the couch, talking about the plans for the next day. It was then that we heard it. It was a faint rustling outside, like something moving through the underbrush. I didn't think much of it at first. We were in the middle of the woods after all. It could have been a deer or some other animal. But the noise kept getting closer, and it wasn't just rustling anymore. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the dried leaves. I stood up and walked over to the window, trying to peer into the darkness. The moon was high, casting an eerie glow over the trees, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Still, the footsteps stopped as soon as I reached the window, and that sent a chill down my spine. I turned back to Sarah, trying to play it off like it was nothing. "Probably just a raccoon or something," I said, forcing a smile. But then it happened again. The footsteps started up, this time closer, like they were right outside the cabin. And then a long, slow scrape against the wall, as if something was dragging a branch, or worse, claws across the wood. Sarah's eyes widened, and she motioned for the kids to come closer. Jake and Emma, sensing the tension, quickly obeyed. I grabbed the flashlight we kept near the door, and despite the knot in my stomach, opened it and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, and the forest was silent. Too silent. Even the usual chirping of crickets had stopped, and the only sound was my own breathing, ragged and shallow. I scanned the trees with the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, but I saw nothing. No sign of movement, just trees and shadows. Then, just as I was about to head back inside, I heard it again. A low growl, so deep it seemed to reverberate in my chest. I whipped the flashlight around, pointing it toward the direction of the sound, and there it was, standing just beyond the reach of the light, partially hidden by the trees, was a figure. At first, it looked like a large animal, maybe a wolf or coyote, but something was wrong. Its eyes reflected the light, glowing an unnatural yellow, and its body was distorted, like it couldn't quite decide if it wanted to be a man or a beast. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and thin, with long limbs that seemed to bend at odd angles. It stared at me, unblinking, and then, in the most horrifying moment of my life, it stood up on two legs. The creature's body elongated, its limbs snapping and cracking as it took on a grotesque, human-like form. But it wasn't human. Not anymore. The thing that stood before me was something far older, far more sinister. A skinwalker. I had heard the legends, but I never believed them. Stories of witches who could transform into animals, creatures that could mimic the voices and appearances of others. But this was real. Too real. It let out another growl, this time more like a distorted human voice, a horrible mockery of speech. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled backwards, nearly dropping the flashlight. The thing took a step forward. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, almost like a puppet with its strings cut. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I turned and bolted back into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me. Sarah was already on her feet, her face pale with fear. "What is it?" she whispered, clutching the kids close. "I don't know." I lied, trying to keep my voice steady, but we need to stay inside. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. The creature circled the cabin, its footsteps heavy and deliberate, occasionally letting out those awful growls. At one point it scratched at the windows, the sounds of its claws against the glass sending shivers down our spine. The kids were crying and I did my best to comfort them, but I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, full of questions I didn't have answers to. As dawn approached, the noises finally stopped. We waited in tense silence until the first rays of sunlight began to creep through the trees. Only then did I dare to peek outside. The creature was gone, but the marks it left behind were all too real. Deep scratches gouged into the wooden walls, and the porch littered with broken branches and trampled leaves. I knew we couldn't stay. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't going to leave us alone. We packed up as quickly as we could, throwing everything into the car. The drive back to the nearest town was silent, the kids too scared to even ask what had happened. We didn't talk about it, not to each other, not to anyone. It was like an unspoken agreement. We'd pretend it never happened. But I could see the fear in Sarah's eyes every time she looked at me, and I knew she was remembering that night just as vividly as I was. Even now, weeks later, I can't get the image of that thing out of my head. I see it every time I close my eyes, standing there in the darkness, watching us with those unnatural yellow eyes. I don't know what it wanted, and I don't want to know. All I know is that we barely made it out of there, and some nights when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear it out there in the woods, waiting. If you ever find yourself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and you hear something moving outside, don't go looking. Lock the doors, stay inside, and pray whatever it is just your imagination. But if it's not, may God help you. I've always loved hiking alone. There's something about the solitude of being out in nature, surrounded by nothing but trees and the sounds of the forest, that really calms my mind. I've hiked countless trails, some well known and others barely marked on the map, but I'll never forget the day I decided to explore a new trail deep in the desert mountains of Arizona. The trail wasn't on any official map. A friend had mentioned it to me, saying it was remote, untouched, and full of breathtaking views. Perfect for someone like me who prefers the road less traveled. I set out early in the morning with my backpack full of supplies, ready for a day of adventure. The first few hours were everything I hoped for. Beautiful scenery, clear skies, and the kind of peace you can only find miles away from civilization. As the sun climbed higher, I found myself deep in the mountains, the trail narrowing into a faint path that wound through dense brush and jagged rocks. That's when I noticed something odd. The forest, which had been alive with sounds of birds and rustling leaves, had gone completely silent. It was like someone had flipped a switch, muting the world around me. I paused for a second, listening, but I couldn't hear anything. Not even the buzz of insects. Just silence. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the wildlife had moved on, or maybe I just crossed into a quieter part of the forest. I pressed on, though a little faster now, eager to reach the ridge I knew was up ahead. The silence stayed with me, pressing in on all sides, until the only sound I could hear was my own footsteps crunching on the gravel. And then I heard something else. Something that didn't belong. Footsteps. They weren't mine, but they were close, echoing my own movements, just a few steps behind. I stopped, and the sound stopped too, almost as if it was waiting for me to move again. I turned around expecting to see another hiker, but there was no one, just the trees. My heart started to pound, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was an animal curious about my presence. But then I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time, almost directly behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, and that's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a large coyote standing just at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the shadows. But as I stared, I realized something was terribly wrong. The way it stood, the way it watched me with those glowing yellow eyes was all wrong. Its body was too large, its limbs too long, and its eyes, they were too intelligent, too human. I took a step back and the creature mirrored me, stepping forward into the light. That's when I saw its true form. It was no coyote. It was something else entirely. Something evil. Its fur was matted and dirty, patches of skin visible underneath, and its face was twisted, like it was trying to mimic a human expression but didn't quite know how. The eyes were the worst part, glowing with a sickly yellow light full of malice and hunger. My body froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The creature took another step toward me, its head tilting as if it were studying me, deciding the best way to strike. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, and let out a low growl that sent every hair on my body standing on end. Finally, the spell broke and I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, not caring where the trail led, just desperate to get away. Behind me, I heard it give chase, its footsteps heavy and fast, gaining on me with every stride. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest, but the creature was relentless. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, hear the snap of its jaws as it tried to grab hold of me. I knew if it caught me, I was done. I spotted a narrow gap between two large boulders up ahead and threw myself into it, squeezing through just as the creature lunged. Its claws scraped against the rock, inches from my face, but it couldn't fit through the gap. I kept running, scrambling up the rocky incline, my hands and knees bleeding from the rough stone. I didn't stop until I reached the top of the ridge, where the forest opened up and the sun shone down on an opening clearing. Gasping for breath, I turned to look back, expecting to see the creature following me, but it was gone. The silence returned, oppressive and unnatural, but there was no sign of the creature. I didn't wait around to see if it would come back. I tore down the trail, not caring about the beautiful views I had come to see, just needing to get back to safety. By the time I reached my car, the sun was starting to set. I threw my backpack in the back seat, jumped in, and sped down the mountain road, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I've never been so scared in my life. I've heard stories about skinwalkers before, but I never believed them. Until now. Whatever that thing was, it was evil, pure and simple, and it wanted me. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't even go near the mountains. The peace and solitude I once loved so much are gone, replaced by the memory of those glowing yellow eyes and the sound of footsteps that weren't mine. And every night, as I lay in bed, I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting for me to let my guard down, ready to finish what it started. It all started as a dare. Isn't that how most terrible things begin when you're a teenager? It was late on a Friday night, and me and my three best friends, Tyler, Matt, and Joey, were hanging out in Tyler's basement. The air was thick with the usual mix of energy drinks, chips, and teenage bravado. We had been talking about the old legends that our parents used to scare us with when we were kids, the stories about the woods just outside our small town. The woods were thick, stretching on for miles, and everyone knew to stay clear of them at night. People said they were haunted, that strange creatures lived there. But we were 16, and none of us really believed in that stuff anymore. At least, that's what we told ourselves. Tyler, always the boldest of the group, grinned at us and said, "I bet none of you have the guts to go out there right now. Let's prove those stories are just crap." I wasn't too sure about it, but I didn't want to look like a coward. Matt and Joey were on board immediately, their competitive streaks taking over. So after a little more trash talking and daring each other, we grabbed some flashlights and headed out into the night. The walk to the edge of the woods wasn't long, but as we got closer, the excitement began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. The woods loomed ahead, dark and silent, like a massive black wall that swallowed everything that came too close. The town lights were far behind us now, leaving just the dim glow of our flashlights to push back the darkness. Tyler led the way, his shoulders squared and flashlight held high, as if daring the woods to try and scare him. Joey followed close behind, while Matt and I brought up the rear. The trail we followed was narrow, overgrown with weeds and thorny bushes that grabbed at our clothes as we pushed deeper into the trees. For a while, nothing happened. We walked and joked, trying to keep the mood light. But the further we went, the quieter it got. The usual night sounds of the chirping crickets and the rustling of leaves all disappeared, leaving only the sound of our footsteps on the dry leaves. Tyler stopped suddenly, and we all nearly bumped into each other. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice a little shaky. We all listened, straining our ears. At first there was nothing, but then from somewhere off to our left, there was a sound. It was faint, like something moving through the underbrush, but it was there. "It's probably just a deer or something," Joey said, trying to sound confident, but his voice cracked at the end. "Yeah, sure," Matt added, though he didn't sound too convinced either. But then we heard it again, louder this time. The sound of branches snapping, like something big was moving closer. Tyler swung his flashlight toward the noise, the beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. But before anyone could respond, the noise came again, this time from the other side of the trail, closer than before. "Okay, that's not normal," Matt said, backing up a few steps. "Let's get out of here." But Tyler, stubborn as ever, shook his head. "Come on, it's just the wind or something. Don't be wimps, let's keep going." Reluctantly, we followed him deeper into the woods, but the unease was growing, gnawing at my gut like a bad feeling that wouldn't go away. The further we went, the more I felt like we were being watched. And then we saw something. Just up ahead in the narrow beam of Tyler's flashlight, something moved. At first it looked like a person standing in the middle of the trail, but it was all wrong. It was too tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It was hunched over, its back to us, and its skin was pale, almost glowing in the dark. "What the hell is that?" Joey whispered, his voice trembling. "Maybe it's someone messing with us," Tyler said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. None of us did. The thing slowly turned around, and that's when we saw its face. Or what should have been its face. Instead, there was a twisted, grotesque mockery of a human face, like someone had taken a mask and stretched it too far, the features distorted and wrong. Its eyes were too large, reflecting the light and eerie yellow glow, and its mouth was wide, full of jagged, sharp teeth. We froze, unable to move as the creature stared at us with those horrible eyes. It tilted its head almost like it was studying us. And then it smiled, this awful, twisted smile that made my blood run cold. "Run," I managed to choke out, and that was all it took. We turned and bolted back down the trail, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the cuts from the branches or the thorns tearing at our clothes. The only thing that mattered was getting away. But the thing followed us. I could hear it behind us, its footsteps heavy and fast, gaining on us with every second. It moved in this jerky, unnatural way, like it wasn't used to its own body. And the sounds it made, a mix of growls and something that almost sounded like laughter, chilled me to the core. We ran, hearts pounding, lungs burning, but the creature was faster. I could feel it getting closer, could almost feel its breath on the back of my neck. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see. Finally, we burst out of the trees and into the open, the town lights in the distance. We didn't stop running until we were back on Tyler's street, all of us gasping for breath, drenched in sweat and covered in scratches. For a long time, we just stood there, trying to process what just happened. Tyler was the first to speak, his voice shaky and full of fear. "What the hell was that thing?" None of us had an answer. We just stared at each other, all traces of bravado gone, replaced by cold, gnawing terror that wouldn't go away. We never told anyone what happened that night. Who would believe us? We made a pact to never speak of it again and to never go back into those woods. But still, I think about it every night. I can still see that creature's face in my nightmares, hear its twisted laughter in the dark. And sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can feel it watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. We ventured too deep into those woods, into a place we had no business being. And now, I'm afraid we brought something back with us. Something that's just waiting for the right moment to come after us again. These stories are just a glimpse of the horrors that lurk in the darkness, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. Remember, the next time you find yourself alone in the woods, it might not just be your imagination. Something could be watching you. If you enjoyed tonight's tales of terror, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling encounters. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.